with it.
Mhm.
It's really my privilege and honor today to introduce Willem to you. He's one of my besties on a tasting panel. Laura is not here. She was momentarily connected, but Laura judged with Willem at the latest Michelangelo competition here in South Africa. But he's a very accomplished winemaker in the footsteps of his father, who I really loved and respected a lot. And with so many of our great winemakers gone, he's one of them. So I have to urge Willem every single day to step in his footsteps and make work of it. But so far it's been quite hard work. Willem is the winemaker at Hermanuspietersfontein, and he holds 2 master's degrees in viticulture and viniculture, one from Stellenbosch University, which is of course the center of the universe, and one from Montpellier in France. He has also worked in France and in Germany until they sent him back to us. And he is now, he was working in South Africa at some very prestigious wineries, but as for the last 7 years, Willem,
Yeah, going on 9 now.
9 at Hermanuspietersfontein, which is of course the real name of Hermanus, the little town in the Overberg, where Willem makes wines from Sondagskloof, but I won't say too much about that because he'll explain it to us all. And it's really a pleasure always to taste his wines and listen to his stories about how these wines came about and what they mean to him. So welcome, and over to you, Willem.
Thank you. Yeah, just before Vivian, before you share my presentation, just on my late father, I think we got an email yesterday from the results from Mundus Vini, where one of his wines again won the best Duro wine at the show. So there's some more tears for you. Some more tears for you there, Winnie. All right. So Vivian, you can share my presentation.
Okay.
We're gonna start off by watching a 2-minute video, which really sort of just sets the tone for my presentation. I think Sondagskloof, which is our wine of origin, is a place that we hold very close to our hearts, and it's very difficult to explain to people, what to experience or what to expect unless you've been there. And so about a couple of years ago, we got 2 very talented videographers to go and capture the heart and soul of Sondagskloof, and this is what they came up with. And so to set the tone for what we're going to be talking about, we're going to watch the 2-minute video, and then I'll hit straight into my presentation. So make sure you hit the volume on your laptop.
Okay.
All right.
Can we see this? Is this working? Can you hear it?
Yeah. right, Vivian, you can go into the first slide, the next one.
Yeah, this is what I'm scared of. Hang on.
Yeah, yeah, no worries. There we go.
think we're
Yeah,
there. Perfect.
All right. Maybe just put it on. There we go. Maybe just, can everybody see all the faces on the right hand side? Maybe just if we can move them. I think, yeah, for us, Sondagskloof is a very specific place, very, you know, there's so much behind it, and that's what we try to capture in the video. I've been fortunate. I've traveled to 56 different countries in the world, all of them promoting wine, tasting wines, and without sounding, you know, biased about it, Sondagskloof is a place. The first time I went there, you know, there's just something about it. And even though I go there on a regular basis, every time I set my foot in that particular ward, there's just something about it that grabs me. And we realized that at a very early stage. And so our whole presentation today is going to be about Sondagskloof and why Sondagskloof is so important to us. So just to present yourself or to familiarize yourself, I'm sure most of you are familiar with, you know, where you are in the world. I've put some markers out so you can see Paul, Stellenbosch, Elgin, the Hermanuspietersfontein Valley, which is where our cellar is located, Elim, which is our closest point of reference, and then slightly northwest of that is where Sondagskloof is at. What is nice about this particular map that I've given you is you can actually also see the topography. So you can see that the ward is nestled between two mountains. The one at the back is about 850 to 900 meters high, and some foothills, the Elim foothills to the south of where we are. So that's just to familiarize yourself. And then southeast from where we are, about 55 kilometers, is Cape Agulhas. Right, Vivian, you can go to the next slide. Right, so just a little bit about the history of the area, and I think this is also very important. The first vines were planted in 1999 on our particular property. The ward in itself, known as Sondagskloof, was formed in 2006. It's only 85 hectares, of which 70 hectares belong to us, and our neighbors have 15 hectares across the road. Currently, there are 4 brands that have wine of origin Sondagskloof on their label. So it's ourselves, our neighbors called Brunia, and then I supply grapes to, you might know Trazan Barnard. She makes a Sondagskloof white from there. And then there's a Zimbabwean sommelier that sells wine into America. We also make some wine for him. So that's a little about the history of the area. Historically, it was grain, a lot of export flowers, so proteas, a little bit of, you know, a little bit of cattle, etc., but no history with regards to vineyards. And so I think it's an important thing to mention, and as we go through the presentation, to realize, you know, that the viticultural history of this area is 20 years old. So there's no reference, there's no book, there's no grandfather that you can phone up, or an uncle that you can ask, you know, what happened here the last time it rained? What did you do the last time that the wind was, you know, so blustery, and all sorts of things like that. So literally every year a new experience. We've got to make and figure it out for ourselves. And on the one hand, it's very scary, but on the other hand, it's also very, very exciting. The history of our farm in itself, our owners bought the property in 2003, 2004. There were some vines on the farm, which a lot of it we've uprooted. Some of them we've regrafted with the varietals that we've wanted. And some of those vineyards we are now replanting for the first time in 20 odd years. Like I've mentioned, the history of the ward dates back to 2006. So our first vintage was 2005. And we were still in process of registering the ward in those days. And where we are today and why we are there, the owners, literally, they were taking a Sunday drive, and they decided, well, this is just such a beautiful piece of earth. You know, we want to buy this farm. They had no intention or no idea what was going to happen after that. And it's a little bit of a fairy tale story over the last 15 to 17 years and where we find ourselves today. But we will see that in the rest of the presentation. Vivian, the next slide, please. Yeah, so just in terms of some of the wards and some of the areas and some of the wines of origin that you might be familiar with, I think Hermanuspietersfontein is probably quite well known. Walker Bay, Cape Agulhas, And so where you see the red star, that's where Sondagskloof is. In English, it's called Sunday's Glen. We're in a stage where locally we talk about Sondagskloof. We're about to launch ourselves onto the international stage, because for the last 17 years, our focus has been very much the South African market. Our split between local and international is we're 97% local and 3% export, which is for most people ludicrous. But yeah, we will talk about that a little bit later in our presentation as well. Okay, next slide, please. Yeah, so just a picture for those of you that have been in the area. Just so Lomond, which is a well-known property, which is southwest from us. Gansbaai, which is, you know, the place to go and watch great white sharks, if that's what you're into. And then to the northwest, we have Hermanus. So that's just a snapshot from the top of the vineyard. Next slide, please. All right, so if I can explain our terroir, I think we find ourselves in very difficult conditions, very different to, you know, the rest of the Western Cape. And I think I've got to just break it down in terms of climates, the soil and the topography. From a climatic area, or from a climatic perspective, temperature-wise, we're much cooler than you will find the rest of the Western Cape. I always tell people that if you drive from Cape Town and it's 30 degrees in Cape Town, you drive to Hermanus, where our cellar is located, it'll be about 23 degrees, so a 7-degree shift. And then you drive another half an hour towards where the vineyards are at, there's another 2 to 3 degrees drop. And the temperature for us is an important thing, because, you know, South Africa, which in general can be categorized as a warmer area, we definitely find ourselves as one of the cooler, if not the coolest areas in South Africa. Very much sort of, you know, on the same level as Elim, which is probably considered the coolest area in South Africa. Then prevailing winds, you know, and this makes our viticulture very, very difficult. We've got prevailing winds southeast, northwest, which is our two dominating winds. And we have wind, I would say, 330 out of the 360 days on the property. This particular vintage, we lost about 20 to 25% of our crop just because we had extreme winds during the flowering period. So it's really, and we'll talk about that just now, about extreme viticulture, but the wind is probably one of our more, you know, challenging factors. And then rainfall, something that a lot of, you know, viticulturists and winemakers in South Africa are not accustomed to or don't know, is our rainfall annually is about 1,000 millimeters, but we have extreme rainfall during the harvesting season, which most winemakers in South Africa are completely unaware of. If there's 20 to 30 to 40 millimeters of rain during the harvest, everybody freaks out. Our annual rainfall for February, March, and the first week of April, so those 10 weeks of harvest, is 175 millimeters of rain, which under South African conditions is absolutely unheard of. And if you look at that, it places us much more in the European mindset, very much Bordeaux-esque compared to anywhere else in the world. If you look at our soils, we've got low potential soils, so shallow duplex soils, top soils of about 30 to 60 centimeters, and then you hit, you know, solid clay. We've got high clay content in the top soil. So again, you know, if you talk about the style of wine, and we will refer to that just now, is when you talk about these things and your terroir, for me, always the most important thing is how does that translate in the wine? But we'll refer to that just now. And then also importantly, topography, south-facing slopes, so the cooler slopes in South Africa. Proximity to the sea is about 15 to 22 kilometers. But even so, we have altitude. Vineyards are planted between 300 and 450 meters above sea level. And then we've got this massive mountain as the backdrop that you saw in the video, which is about 850 meters high, which we call the Rainmaker, which plays a massive influence in our microclimate on the property itself. Next slide, please, Vivian. So just another picture from the top of the vineyard so that you can more or less sort of see what it looks like. So our vineyard's in the foreground, and just to orientate yourself, southeast, south, and southwest. Okay, next slide, please. So when we talk about extreme viticulture, I've sort of just broken it down then, meaning, you know, sort of, you know, the current viticultural and winemaking team, dates from 2013-14 onwards. Apologies for the typo. It's not 2103, it's 2013. But yeah, so historically, because it was a cool climate area and because it was a completely unknown area, the consultants that came into the area, 15 years ago, everybody was afraid of drinking green wines and rubbery wines from South Africa. So everything with regards to the viticulture and the winemaking was geared to move as far away from green wines and rubbery wines as possible. So the rubbery wines probably more a cellar problem, the green wines viticultural. And so when we planted vineyards, we planted on low potential soils, low grafting potential, viticultural practices, and everything was geared so that you would have low yields, slow ripening vines, etc., etc. And what we see now is we have such low yielding vines, 4.5 to 5 tons a hectare, which equates in French terms to about 30 to 32, hectoliters per hectare, which is extremely low. We're talking first growth, sort of numbers. And what we quickly realized is that, with different viticultural practices, breaking open the leaves, shoot positioning and things like that, we can create very interesting wines without having that fear of creating wines that are green, wines that are thin, and getting more sunlight into wine. And so since 2013, what we've done with the replanting of all our vineyards is we've looked at better planting material, the grafting, the rootstock combinations with the cultivars, soil preparation, and all of those things were more geared to elevate yield in the vineyard, because we know that we can, through short-term viticultural practices, we can eliminate all sorts of, issues, for example, green or bud fertility or all sorts of problems like that. And so the focus going forward has definitely been, to promote sustainability on the farm, not just from a viticultural or a soil perspective, but also from a financial perspective. You've got to farm and plant vineyards that, over the next 20, 25, 30 years will be viable, and will actually make, a difference on the bottom line. So when you go on to practices, like I've mentioned, some of those things in terms of soil preparation, how deep do we go when we prepare the soil for the planting of new vineyards? Also the varietal and the varietal selection, the rootstock selection. How does the rootstock, does it promote yield, or does it sort of stem and reduce the yields? And just those sort of combination, clonal differences, etc., which in a marginalized area like ours plays a massive difference. Something that we've seen in a marginalized cool climate area, some of the subtle changes that in a warm area just sort of, is not as pronounced, is very much expressed in a cool climate area. Something like clonal differences, something like leaf break at a certain stage, where if you do that in a Stellenbosch, Paarl, Swartland area, the effect might not be as expressed as when you do it in a cool climate area. And then, like I've written down there on my presentation, challenges. Climatic challenge is immense. From a temperature perspective, just take 2022 for example. We had a very cool build up to the season. Summer temperatures. Hello, sorry. Somebody joined us. Okay, I'll just continue. So from a climatic challenge, temperatures definitely play a massive role. In 2022, for example, build up to the season was cool, was mild. Throughout December, early January, we had average temperatures of 19 to 20 degrees. And then all of a sudden, for the first time in our history, we went from having 18, 19 degrees on the Friday to having 30, 34, 35, 42 degrees on the Tuesday and the Wednesday. And so we see all sorts of spikes like that. Some people say it's climate change. Some people say it's just, that's just a vintage expression. We don't know. Hopefully we will not live through something like that again. But, those are the things that from our perspective is again, really in a cool climate area, it can be very detrimental to the winemaking. Then we move on to the wind. I think for us, the biggest challenge with wind is the timing of the wind and when it happens. Unfortunately for us, a lot of the wind that we do receive is October, November, which is sort of just flowering, just after flowering. And we saw that again in 2022. We saw the same in 2018, where we literally lost 40 or 20% of our crop that during flowering just literally blew into the ocean. And then also, like I've mentioned, the rainfall, which is every year is a massive challenge. It plays with, so when you want to harvest certain vineyards, some blocks you want to ripen a little bit more. You plan to harvest 10 days, 12 days, then it rains, then all your plans all of a sudden need to be changed. And so that's why it plays into the next point. There is the timing and the logistics of what we do on a viticultural basis. Is, we can have the perfect plan for the week, and then in the space of a day and a half, everything changes and you've got to go back to the drawing board. So we don't have that comfort of, planning too far ahead. It's very much boots on the ground, having the ability to adapt within a short space of time, be that on the farm and also in the cellar. And hence the fact that we've dubbed this slide Extreme Viticulture. Between myself and the viticulturist Lochner on the farm itself, we always say that from one vintage to the next, the only certainty that we have is that it's going to be different than the previous vintage. And for the last 9-10 vintages that I've been with Hermanuspietersfontein, it's been exactly that. Vivian, you can go to the next slide. So from a winemaking perspective, if you put everything that I've said together, you look at, where we are situated, our climatic conditions, our terroir, soil, all of those things, plus the challenges that we face and the decisions that we've made, it places us much more, in a European mindset, purely just because of, the site that dictates that. And so for us to go and try to create a wine that is probably, sort of our rule of thumb, more South African, more muscular, more expressive, bold, like some of the more traditional South African wines. If we try to create something like that, we are going to completely miss the ball. And so we've adopted a European mindset where, for us, it's all about the expression of sight. We don't try to out-muscle the wine. We don't try to over-extract the wine. And if you look at the pillars there at the bottom, those are the 5 pillars that we build on, and that all the wines at Hermanuspietersfontein need to tick those boxes: balance, elegance, freshness, drinkability, longevity. And if I can quickly just summarize what they mean to us, balance for us simply means that all the aspects in the wine, play along together. It's like, you have the big kid in the playground, you've got the nerdy guy in the playground, you've got the clever girl, so you have in wine, you've got tannin, you've got residual sugar, you've got acidity, you've got oak, and all sorts of different aspects. And for us, it's not about, making sure that the one is this and the other one's that. We understand that everybody has a level of sensitivity. Some people are more sensitive to tannin, some people are more sensitive to residual sugar, some people are more, it might be acidity or tannin or whatever the situation might be. For us, it's a case of creating a wine where, regardless of your level of sensitivity, everybody will be able to appreciate the wine. And that's what balance means to us. Elegance for us is wines that are understated, but definitely have a sense of power and personality. It's definitely not wines that are weak or thin or watery. And I think that's often confused. It's wines that have incredible power, but it's not overpowering. It's not like you're stepping into the ring with Mike Tyson and you know that after the first glass of wine, it's going to be like, one punch from Mike Tyson and you're going to be on the floor. We want people to sit and enjoy our wines and drink, 2, 3, 4 glasses, without having to, feel like they're going to fall off their chair or whatever the situation might be. Freshness for me, I think, is one of the missing ingredients in modern wine in the world. We often talk about acidity. We very seldomly talk about freshness. I'm referring to New World wines. I think in Europe, we've been talking about freshness for a long time, but in the New World wines, especially where we're allowed to acidify, we often refer to acidity rather than freshness. And so for us, freshness refers to the natural acidity that we have in all our wines. And because we're a cool climate area, we don't need to acidify our wines, which is a rarity for South African producers. I also always refer to freshness as, it's the same as when you have a 6-course meal and the chef introduces a little scoop of sorbet or whatever to just refresh your palate. That for me is what freshness is. It is acidity plays a big role, but it's not just acidity. It can be phenolics, it can be new oak, it can be oak tannin. There are so many things that contribute to the freshness of a wine rather than just acidity. And so we focus very much on that, especially when we talk about red wines or even white wines. The use of new oak and the clever use of neutral oak to enhance the freshness of the wine, rather than just just focusing on the acidity. And then for me, if you add balance, elegance, and freshness, you get drinkability, which is what we all want. We all want to sit and enjoy a glass of wine, and then the second, and then the third. For me, the worst thing is when you sense that it's a good glass of wine, but if somebody wants to refill your glass, you're like, it's okay, I'll rather try something else. And for us, the focus is very much to create wines where people want to sit and have fun and enjoy the wines, rather than sip, gargle, and spit, and then move on to the next one. And then longevity, I think because of the cool climate and the climatic conditions, that also plays into our favor. Our wines have an incredible capacity to age, also because of the high levels of natural acidity, also the lower alcohols that we have in our wine. So those are the 5 pillars that we focus on: balance, elegance, freshness, drinkability, longevity. All right, next slide. Thanks, Vivian. So from a vinification point, we've got a very not sophisticated, very simple cold chain. We've got a cold room on the farm where we harvest the grapes, and then from there it gets trucked to the cellar, where we will then also keep the wine in a cold room until we crush and destem. The nice thing about excuse me, the nice thing about that is it helps to keep the integrity of the grapes. It doesn't make the wine better or worse. It just protects the integrity of the grapes for a much longer time. We also believe with, to treat the grapes respectfully. We gravity feed the grapes into the cellar, whether it's in the press or whether it's in the red wine fermenting vessel. And for us, we're definitely not minimal interventionalists, but we believe in treating the fruit respectfully so that it will express the site and where the grapes are grown. From a maturation perspective, we will see just shortly in our brand and how the brand architecture plays out. But all of our wines have some form of maturation in oak, from the rosé to the lighter style Sauvignon to the fuller style Sauvignon, all through the red wines. All of them have one or other form of barrel maturation. I'm a massive advocate for the use of clever oak, new oak, neutral oak. I think it's such a missing ingredient in our industry, just because either winemakers are lazy or they just don't understand. And I know I'm going out on a limb here, and I might be stepping on some toes and some theories. But so we spend a lot of time to make sure that the selection of our barrels, the oak that we use, the suppliers that we work with, are on par with what we try to do. And for me, if I have to summarize barrel maturation and barrel selection, I think the most important thing here is, again, the respecter of fruit. And what we find is neutral oak does much better there than wines that are slightly too toasty. Also, what I find is that barrels that have been seasoned for 36 months rather than 24 months in the dry yard, you also have less of that sort of aggressive green tannin in the wine. And so we try to buy and work with suppliers that have a longer drying philosophy in their drying yard. And we just find that works better for our style of wine. So most of the red wines spend at least 2 years in oak. We've got different selections of oak, from 225 barrique to the 500 Pichon to the 6,000 liter Foudres. We've got a nice array of barrels, and we play around with that and different forms of oak. Very important to mention, we only work with French oak, no American, no Eastern European. The simple reason for that is that I find that the American and the Eastern European oak is too aromatic, and we don't we don't use barrels for aroma. We use barrel for structure and texture. And so that's why I've mentioned a couple of times that the more neutral the oak for me, the better. And then bottle maturation on some of our top end red wines, we do a 1 to 2 year bottle maturation, just because we find that that's the style of wine that we want to present to our customers. And we also just find that that is, in terms of our site expression, that's exactly what, you know, the site wants to be. Okay, next slide, please. Yeah, so just to break from the academics, just a little bit of something visual. So there you can, there's a nice picture just to show you what our vineyards look like, with the massive mountain at the backdrop, and also just pointing the direction of Hermanus to the left-hand side of your screen being northwest. And then the next slide, I think, points southeast, Vivian. Yeah, so that's just to point in the other direction. I think that's probably the best picture, bird's eye view from the property. There you can see all the slopes running up on the mountain, and then the top of the mountain, like I've mentioned, about 850 meters high. The top vineyards are about 450 meters above altitude. Okay. Next slide, please. Yeah, so in closing, brand structure. When we started our brand in 2005, all the way to 2014, so pretty much for the first 10 years of our lifespan, we had 15 different SKUs, so 15 different wines. And from a small property that only crushes about 350 tons, you know, there's, you know, that's a lot of different wines, you know, for a sales team to go and present, you know, to the market. So when I started here in 2013, 2014, up until where we are today, we've reduced it from 15 to 6 SKUs. So focus is very much the name of the game. And we just realized that out of the 15 SKUs that we had, you know, 4 out of the 15 contributed to about 85 to 90% of our turnover. So I just asked the question, well, why are we making all of these wines if they're not contributing to what we are doing? And so over a period of time and a process of elimination, some of those wines we stopped making, and some of them we've retired into what we call our library collection. So some of those wines are still available, some of those older vintages are still available, but we don't produce the wine actively anymore. So on a local side, we've got a core collection, which, like I've mentioned, 6 wines, and then the library collection, which refers to our older vintages and some of the experimental wines that we've made and that we've released over time. And then internationally, we've split it between an icon range, which comprises of 3 SKUs, and sort of trade wines, which can be 3 to 4 different wines. All right, next slide, please. So these are on the first slide are 3 icon wines. And I think the easiest way to before we go into the nitty-gritty is to sort of say the mindset here is to have, you know, 3 top-tier wines. So you'll have a icon red, and then followed by an estate red, followed by an estate white. And this is pretty much what we have at the moment in our range. Sorry. So our icon red is called Swartskap, which is an Afrikaans name, which translates black sheep. It's 100% Cabernet Franc, 50% new oak, and it's also split 50% between small and bigger vessels. This wine spends about 2 years in barrel, and then another 2 years in the bottle. Then our estate red is a full-scale Bordeaux blend dominated by Cabernet Sauvignon, and then depending on the vintage, normally either second most important varietal can be Petit Verdot or Merlot. Here we only use a small percentage of new oak, less than 10%. This wine ages normally for about 2 years in French oak foudres, so the 6,000 liter format. And the reason for that is because here we want to accentuate the fruit freshness of the property and of the site. And we just find that over time, after 2-3 years of maturation, you know, you find a wine that is so complete, yet it shows an incredible aspect of freshness. And then our estate white is a fuller style Bordeaux blend. Currently, it's 100% Sauvignon. Historically, sometimes we dab a little bit with Sauvignon Blanc. And here we use 500 liter French oak barrels. And sometimes, you know, we play a little bit with smaller oak. All right, next slide, please, Vivian. Yeah, and then if you look at sort of the bottom end of the scale, the more sort of trade wines, Carlfoot Macy, which is the Barefoot Girl, is a lighter style Bordeaux blend, again dominated by Sauvignon Blanc with a little bit of Semillon. There we have about a 15% wooded component. And then we have Bleu's, which is our dry style rosé, which is dominated by Merlot and Malbec, which is also a wooded rosé. So the wine spends it's about in contact with oak for anything between 2 to 6 weeks. And then last but not least, our everyday enjoyable red wine, which is a Merlot, which also spends about 5 to 6 months in oak before the wine gets released, and is also under a screw cap closure. Yeah, so I think that is the end of my presentation. Over to Winnie and Vivian for questions. 40 minutes on the dot.
Done. Very
Not
concise.
bad, not bad. It shows you how well he can listen when you make him. I just wanted to show you this. This is the, oh, I'm trying to get it in the picture. This is the little carved sheep that you can buy when you go to Hermanuspietersfontein, and it's all done by local artists, Willem.
That's correct, yeah.
I have a range of 3 of these in different sizes, and I mean, I just love them. I love them.
Yeah.
No
Are there
black
any
ones.
questions? What?
Said no black ones.
Yeah,
there
are black ones.
But the black ones are more expensive, and Willem won't give me one. So,
Oh.
so are there any questions for Willem?
Yes, I can just see
Meg.
one from Meg.
Hello, Meg Maker here. Willem, that was really fantastic. I've never had the privilege to visit South Africa, so it looks like absolutely stunning viticulture. I have so many questions, and I was typing furiously during your presentation, but I noted that you're really trying to build the export market. What are you doing to do that, and what markets are you focusing on right now?
Yeah, so great question. So I think for us as a you know, very focused on the local market, I think it's been for us, it gives a lot of security that we've got such a strong local market, so we can be quite brave going into the international market. We've focused on the USA is at the moment our main market. We're working with a importer that only imports South African wines, and when we joined them in 2018, they were primarily Northwest, so based in Minnesota and some of the states around. And excuse me, during COVID, they actually extended their network, so we are now represented in 35 different states. So we're very excited about the possibilities. We've also just taken on an export manager as a consultant, and he's just spent 3 weeks in the US. He literally came back last week. So there's a lot of things happening there. So the USA for us is a big focus. And then once we're in the process of rebranding for the international market. So once we've completed that, I think the UK will become our next focus market, and then we'll go into Europe. So we're sort of taking it from the west to the east. So those are the 3 main areas that we're focusing on now.
Thank you. Do you have the name of the U.S. importer that you work with?
It's Truvino.
Truvino. Okay, thank you.
Truvino. But Meg,
I'm in the U.S., so I'm very interested in that.
So if Meg, if you have more questions, you can email me, and I will answer all your questions, and I can send you their details and all sorts of things like that.
Yeah, thank you. I'd love to try the wines and maybe write about them for I have a lot of U.S. readers for my own website. So
okay,
yeah.
Well,
great. Thank you very much.
I'll get in contact with you and make sure that happens.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Great.
Michelle?
Yeah, I'd like to ask a question. Like Neil asked in the chat, I'm very curious to know, why is it, I know the area, I've been to the area and visited some of the wineries, and they principally have Pinot Noir. So I just wanted to know also why, you don't have Pinot Noir. I know you want to do something different, obviously, but that's just
it's a great question. I think primarily, when I started there in 2014, we made, like I mentioned, we made 15 different wines. Some of them were Bordeaux, some of them were Rhone focused. We've got 15 rows of Pinot Noir on the farm, which goes into bubbly that, you know, we drink ourselves, and we play around with. But we made the decision in 2017-18 that, you know, when we go to the international stage, is that we want to present a style of wine. And, you know, obviously with Bordeaux varietals being the majority of the plantings at that stage, plus in my mind also all of our best wines were Bordeaux focused. We made the decision that that's where we're going to put our energy, because I just feel that if I'm doing a presentation in New York or London or Tokyo, and I'm standing there and I'm explaining to people my terroir, and I'm telling them, well, I'm making Bordeaux on this slope and Pinot Noir on that slope and Chardonnay there and Pinot Noir is there, you know, people go like, well, this oak's a joke, you know, because how can you, you know, in the international understanding, how can you have, you know, so many different appellations on one property? So you will see in my presentation as well is that focus for us is key. So everything that we do is we want to have, you know, a focused approach. We want to have a focused way of communicating who we are, what we are, and what we are trying to do. And we just felt, looking at the wines and looking at what's in the cellar, looking what's in the bottle, and also looking at some of the older vintages that's already 10 years old, 12 years old, opening those bottles and saying, well, the Bordeaux varietals are just so much better. And that's why I mentioned in my presentation, if you look at extreme viticulture, what we used to do and what we are doing is we are also gearing ourselves. I mean, we've recently replanted some vineyards and a lot of Cabernet Franc going in there, because we just believe that, you know, for where we are, site expression, and from a viticultural perspective of what we can do, you know, we can make some really good Bordeaux wines. And I think also we want to differentiate ourselves and say, well, this is what Sondagskloof is all about, you know, because, and that's why the title of the presentation is The Soul of Sondagskloof, because, you know, we registered the ward, you know, we planted the first vineyards, you know, and also there's no more space for the ward, you know, the ward can't grow any bigger. Nobody else can come in there and plant more vineyards, you know. So to a certain extent, you know, up until recently, we were a bit of a monopole appellation, and we believe that Bordeaux varietals is, you know, what we want to present to the people. Also, that you've got to be, also importantly, what you have to realize is that, you know, we are about 60 to 70 kilometers from the Hermanuspietersfontein Valley. So from a microclimate perspective, we're very far apart from what the Hermanuspietersfontein is. We get much more wind, much more rainfall than them, and we're at least 2 degrees cooler than the Hermanuspietersfontein Valley. So maybe in hindsight, Pinot Noir and Chardonnay would not have been a bad call. But you know what? Like I mentioned right in the beginning, is our area is 20 years old. There's no grandfather or uncle or cousin that you can phone and say, hey, what did you guys do, you know, when it was raining or when the wind was blowing? You know, we're literally, so to speak, making it up as we go along. So there's a little bit of, you know, fear involved and anxiety involved, but it's also a hell of a exciting journey to be on.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.
So I think the best thing, Michelle, is that next time when you're in South Africa, to come and visit the property and taste the wines, and then you can tell me whether I'm in the right direction or not.
I'd love to. Thank you very much.
Hello, Laura.
Yes. Trevor wants to know, hi, Laura. I noticed that you've covered up the bathing costume and we're only seeing your face because you're right next to the swimming pool. Now, we noticed that earlier on. Oh, you're on mute. Trevor wants to know about the COVID lockdowns and the prohibition. Did that have any lasting issues on your production and moving of your stock?
Yeah, I mean, we were one of the very few farms that didn't do any bootlegging, because we're in such a hotspot in terms of we're right on a busy road. So in the first week of lockdown, the police knocked 3 times on our door. And I just realized, you know, if we're going to try and move stuff, you know, we're going to get into serious trouble. So we just sort of buckled down and decided, you know, we'll just ride it out. I think what played in our favor is because we've got such a strong local market. Between the first and the second lockdown, we sold about 25% of our annual turnover in 3 weeks. I think our local support was just absolutely immense. and that sort of burst of sales really carried us through. Then between the second and the third lockdown, stuff became a little bit more challenging. And I think the lasting effect of COVID for me is twofold. First is cash flow. I think the reserves that everybody built up, got consumed by COVID. And then also, I think the other thing that very few people realize is, and we're only starting to see it now, is that the supply chain is completely broken. Bottles that need to come in from all different parts of the world, capsules, dry goods, all sorts of things like that. It's the supply chain is under immense pressure, and that also eats cash flow. All of a sudden, where I could order bottles off a shelf, now I've got to pay 3 months in advance for bottles and cross my fingers, hope it arrives. Just something stupid before COVID, we paid between $3,500 and $4,000 for a container of bottles. That's been pushed out to $14,000 for a container of bottles, which is absolutely ludicrous. And somebody has to absorb that. So it's quite challenging.
In fact, when you're talking about bottles, I was looking at specialty bottles for brandy the other day, and all of those bottles, I was told there's at least an 8-month waiting list, and then you're still not sure that the bottles are going to arrive within the year. So it is a very big challenge for the whole South African wine industry. Willem, Neil wants to know what your annual production is.
Yeah, so annual production, we crush. We crush about 350 to 400 tons. So that equates to about 300,000 liters, maybe a little bit less. So that's what we crush. We've got one product that we don't have enough. We don't have enough vineyards in the ground, which we buy wine. So annual production or sales is just short of $500,000.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Hi, Peter. I didn't see you arriving late. You look like you're sitting in the Queen's anteroom or something like that. Welcome. And then Meg just has another message here for you, Willem. You can read it there about the US. I
can see it. Yeah. So organic wines. I think that's a that's a difficult conversation. I think just from our own brand perspective. Our biggest challenge is because we've got such extreme viticultural conditions. As it is with sustainable viticulture, we're already struggling, to make sure that we have healthy fruit, to create good wines. Our neighbor across the road, I can say, recently converted to biodynamic, and I know they've had 2 vintages where they lost more than 70% of their crop. So. If you have owners or a bank manager that is, very accommodating, by all means. But I think when you do organic or biodynamic, you've got to make very sure about your site selection and where you want to go about it. And I think also if you compare, South Africa to Europe, for example, I think we're a little bit behind with regards to the mindset of organic and biodynamic. There are definitely people catching on, but we're not nearly close to where Europe is at the moment.
Meg, unmute.
I just had to get to the screen. So so I was looking at your site as we're speaking, and it looks like your brochure on your site suggests that some of the wines are biodynamic and others are certified sustainable.
Yeah, so it's not biodynamic. We used to be BWI, which is the sort of the emblem of sustainability. We had I wouldn't say a bit of a run-in, we had a slight disagreement with them and the way they do things. So we decided to part from BWI. Okay. In all fairness, for me, if I am going to be sustainable or organic or even biodynamic, I want to do it for the right reasons. And without sounding political, unfortunately, there are a lot of these organizations that, they want you to do window dressing. And we just said, well, we're not into that. If we're going to do it, we're going to do it right. Otherwise, we're going to we're going to pull out. So we pulled out of BWI, I think in 2017 or 18, I think. But obviously, some of those wines are still
see. Yeah.
certified BWI.
Yeah. I dropped the PDF that I was looking at into the chat there, so people can see that brochure. I was looking at True Vino and found my way to your website.
Yeah. So also interesting, what you've got to realize is that I know especially in the States, for something to be classified as organic versus our regulations, it's not the same regulation. So some of the things that we do locally, which is seen as sustainable, is seen as organic in the US, but we don't see it as organic. So that's why Truvino will claim or will say that some of the things that we do are organic, because on US standards, it actually does qualify as organic. Yeah. Does that make sense? Okay.
Any other questions for Willem? You've answered everything.
Well,
so now you can go back to work.
I think I'm going to go and have ice cream and watch some whales.
Ice cream and watch some. It is well time in Hermanus, isn't it? You're right.
It is indeed. I'm gonna take my kids for ice cream, and we're gonna go and do a bit of whale watching.
Good. Well, enjoy. Well, everybody, thank you very much for attending this afternoon. Willem, it's always lovely to have you.
Thank you very much, Minnie.
Educating me. I learn something every time I listen to you. So thank you very, very much. And
absolute pleasure.
Everybody have a lovely weekend. And let's all have a glass of Hermanuspietersfontein. If you can say it, you've got to drink it. I'd love to hear Meg say it. But she's not going to put her speaker back on.
I have to drink it first. Sorry, Winnie.
Yeah, we go. There we go.
Thank you very much for attending, and we'll see you next time. Thanks, Willem.
Thank you very much.